Changes, they are coming. Number 32. Yep, the 32nd head coach of the Maple Leafs. It'll be Craig Berube. That's what we know. We also know this. Dave Pagnotta is in studio with us now. You know him from the Fourth Period, SiriusXM NHL Radio, and of course right here on the network. So, Dave, I guess we'll start there.
Yeah.
I asked EJ if he was surprised. He wasn't. I'm not going to ask you the same thing. Is he the right fit for the team?
He's what they wanted. They wanted somebody that was not going to be afraid to hold his guys accountable and not be afraid to send the right message, whether you're a 50-goal scorer or a 5-goal scorer. They wanted to make sure that there was consistency across the board from a coaching perspective, and they wanted a hard-nosed guy. It's not to say Keefe wasn't. I'm sure he had his moments, but they wanted somebody that had the experience with a winning pedigree and wasn't afraid to flex his muscles when he needed to in the right environment. And I think this is a great add for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, somebody that they wanted from the get-go in terms of personality and what he brings, but also structurally. And he's going to take some of what he did on the ice and is going to translate that to the bench and hopefully make this team a little bit more physical and a little bit more aggressive on the ice.
Yeah, he's won. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Exactly.
He's won, right? And you coach, so you know what that means when a guy steps behind that bench. There's a little something extra there, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the discipline's everything. It's a discipline, accountability, and consequences. Those are the three things you expect from your head coach to hold the players to that stage. But for myself, I'd like to know, what two moves do you think Toronto could make to help Berube going into next season after this year's drop-off in the playoffs?
Yeah, well, one of the things that Treliving had mentioned during the press conference a week ago today was that skill is one thing, but you need to have the other pieces in place. You need to have those other intangibles that are there as well. And they've lacked that for the last little bit. Now, they also mentioned that when they have you bring in the coach, he's going to dictate part of how this roster is going to be moving forward. So this is going to be something that is going to come into play with him, Treliving, and the staff in terms of how the makeup of this group is going to look like. And I think you're going to want to have more physicality into this group. Now, they've already relayed the message to Tyler Bertuzzi that they want to have a discussion about keeping him and bringing him in long term. He had that one-year contract. He'll be a UFA. They got a lot of free agents here on the board, as you have, that are guys that they need to deal with now that they've got that head coach. I don't believe TJ Brodie is coming back. I think he's going to be walking as a free agent. He'll go into July 1 looking for a new home. But Bertuzzi and Domi are two guys, and I think Joel Edmondson as well, that they're going to look at to try to see how they can keep those players in the fold. And then at the same time, bring in similar type of players as well. Obviously, we got to get to the big boy in a second, but I do believe that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be a team that want to add size, physicality, and that extra grit to the lineup going into next season. And I think Berube is going to dictate how that's going to look, and as well as his staff. He's got to round out his coaching staff as well. He's got a few people in mind right now. I think those decisions will come in the next few days too.
Why the announcement at like 5 p.m. Eastern on a Friday night?
Typical Toronto Maple Leafs type of maneuvering. At least it wasn't 6 o'clock p.m. or anything like that.
Surprised it wasn't at 7 o'clock when the Bruins game started.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, wait till 7:07.
I do have a theory about that. I just think that this became a real open secret, and you're chasing these stories.
Yeah.
But I've seen it everywhere all week that it was likely going to be Berube. I think it just bubbled to the point where they had to do something because they were getting a deluge of calls, questions, what was going to happen. I'm sure in a perfect world for the league, they would prefer this story unfold after this round finishes, but we don't live in a perfect world.
No, we don't. And this was a guy that even before the playoffs began, at least from what we were being told, and what I was being told, was he was going to be given full consideration for the position if they were going to make that type of change. So this goes back, several weeks in terms of that possibility coming into play. Again, as I mentioned, he's got to round out his coaching staff now, and I believe he has a few different individuals in mind as to who we'd like to bring on. I think one guy right now has former NHL head coaching experience, so we'll see kind of how that unfolds. But you got to round that staff out, and then you've got to make those big decisions roster-wise.
Yeah, so before we move on for Toronto, and there's other teams that we want to get in, Mitch Marner, what do you think?
I think they will go to Mitch. I think they're going to have a discussion now with Berube. I think they're eventually going to go to Mitch and say, would you consider waiving your no-movement clause? I don't anticipate the same from a John Tavares perspective, and Mitch may say no, but I believe that is at least that discussion will at least happen, and then he's got to make a decision. Talked to some people in his camp. They don't believe that's going to be a consideration. Talked to a few others, and they do believe that he would at least consider based on where the potential options may be. But I do believe that the Toronto Maple Leafs at some point soon are going to have that discussion with Mitch in his camp.
EJ and I were talking earlier in the week about the Carolina Hurricanes, and they seemingly get to the same spot, and it's like kind of the same built team, and they continue to run into the same issues in the postseason. Definition of insanity. Do you see changes coming for the Hurricanes?
They've got 8 unrestricted free agents on their roster. I've got to imagine there will be some decent size change coming for the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, when they acquired Jake Gensel, they made it clear to him and his agent that they want to discuss the possibility of him staying long term. They want to give him an 8-year deal. They want to go as all in as they possibly can to get him locked up. So they're going to have that conversation with Ben Hankinson, his agent, in the not too distant future. But the other guys, Teravainen and Shea and Pesce and so on, those contract discussions during the season were almost non-existent. Like the agents called, they asked, they got nothing. So I don't know if this was by design, if they wanted to keep this going until after the season to deal with it, but those are a lot of guys in 7 weeks that could hit the open market, and they've got to figure out some stuff relatively quickly here. They can't keep them all. They've got about, I can't remember the exact number, 25 million, 30 million in cap space. It's not going to be enough because the other guy that they also have to worry about that was on the board as well as an RFA in Nick Ash.
Yeah.
They got to worry about him, and his name popped up in the season with a few teams too.
Yeah, they have a lot of business to do, but I guess I'm not surprised that they're doing it this way because that's what Tom Dundon does, right? They do their business in a different way in Carolina, and that's not been a surprise. I think for me, though, when I look at all those names, I thought they had a really good roster. I thought they had a really good team. I thought they played well in a lot of areas and could have won this series.
Yeah.
But to me, it's still amazing. They just do not prioritize goaltending there. It is their way of thinking. It's an analytical thing, and they feel like they can get by with average-type goaltending. And Freddie Anderson's been a really good goalie in his career, but he's an average-type goaltender, especially in big spots. And they haven't had that real horse like the Rangers have Shesterkin. Now, they drafted him,
right,
but maybe the focus should be on trying to go out and make a move to add one of the,
we
teams
talked about
and coaches are way
4
better.
different guys that are number ones now in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do as a coach. I will say that, but Rod's done a great job with that.
Yeah, and if you had that guy you can lean on in a big spot. I mean, I think last night, again, I don't mean to take Freddie Anderson to task here, but those are a couple of goals in that game that you can't have in a big moment when you're leading in the game and your team is playing well.
Well, he was tired, EJ. He needed some extra rest, right?
That's what Keith was saying the other day. I had to tired.
I'll take game 3 off. You guys figure it out.
Just take a nap.
But, I mean, that's the thing. I think there are guys out there. I mean, the Bruins are going to move Ullmark most likely. We don't know what the Flames are going to do with their situation. There are guys out there, and I think that's an area that they may have to prioritize a little bit more moving forward because I like a lot of things on their team, but you're not going to win when your goalie is giving up bad goals at the wrong time.
They'll have the cap space, certainly, to do it if that's an area that they want to address. And look, Brett Pesce was hurt for a while and this, that, and the other. So, I mean, you're going to have to augment your D-core to kind of go along with your goaltending. So we'll see kind of how that unfolds. But big decisions in Carolina.
No question.
Let's sneak in another team, the Winnipeg Jets. What kind of offseason do you expect?
Well, this is, I mean, all 3 of these teams, one figured out their coach, the other 2 have to figure out theirs. So other than that, they want to address their blue line. And this has been an ongoing thing for this team for a while now, is addressing the blue line. And that's something that Chevy hasn't really been able to do in terms of bringing in an impact guy. And they've got some free agents that they've got to deal with. Obviously there with Toffoli and Monahan, 2 guys that they brought in mid-season. I think there's going to be some consideration for Monahan. I think Toffoli's probably going to price himself out of that. And there are some teams that are very curious, by the way, about Cole Perfetti. And his usage in the postseason was limited. And that raised some eyebrows for at least a few teams. So they're going to poke around to see if, I don't know what appetite Winnipeg has at this point, but there are going to be some teams that are going to look at Perfetti and say, hey, maybe we can make something work here if you really do want to bring in a top 4, top 2 defenseman. The other guy whose name is out there right now, which is, I heard it, I'm a little surprised it actually has made the rounds now, but Nikolai Ehlers is a player that some teams are very curious about, and I believe the Jets are willing to look at to see if they can make that big addition on the blue line. He's entering an expiring deal. He's got a $6 million cap hit. He has some trade protection with a 10-team no trade list. But you got to pay the price if you want to bring in somebody big. And Ehlers may be a casualty of that. They've got depth up front, but they want to solidify that depth on the back end.
Yeah, I don't think Perfetti is going to bring that defenseman that you need because he hasn't proven himself yet.
Yeah.
Ehlers definitely somebody that they're looking at because he wasn't very consistent.
Yeah, I think they just got to get a little bit bigger and stronger on the blue line. I mean, like, you know,
They got the goalie.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of like Toronto, but Toronto doesn't have the goalie like they have. And I mean, you need D-men, and Toronto's the same way. They don't have any scoring from their D-men.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. If you can address that area. Yeah. You know, from Winnipeg's perspective, and help Hellebuck out. I know he put a lot of it on himself during the playoffs, but you add to that blue line, it makes his job a little bit easier.
A little bit bigger, a little bit stronger on the blue line, I think, would help them. They got a lot of positives there in Winnipeg, and it'll be interesting to see which direction they go with the coach. Do they go with Scott Arniel, who they know, or do they go outside the organization and try to go in a different direction?
They were exploring their options. The latest I heard today was Arniel might be kind of front runner in that department, but we'll obviously have to wait and see. They need to make a decision. Seattle, San Jose, LA as well. I know there were some talks with Jim Hiller this week. We'll see kind of how that develops.
Hey, do you think now that Berube is off the market that the domino has fallen a little bit and now we're going to see movement here?
Yeah, I could certainly see that. I could see New Jersey being next. Sheldon Keefe, this, again, going back to the start of the playoffs, there was already speculation that Sheldon Keefe was right on New Jersey's radar if he was going to be available. I do think that that's going to be a consideration for them, a serious one, and I think we might be getting there. Like Berube's contract was effectively done last night, and they were just kind of finalized everything this morning. I wouldn't be surprised to see something similar happen from Keefe's perspective now.
Dave, it was great having you here. And listen, I'm saving you from this because Torch wanted to ask you. You're from Toronto. He was like, let's ask him about a Toronto rapper and a beef that's going on.
Yes.
He wanted to. Okay. I said no, so we're going to leave that to the side, okay?
Perfect. Little different neighborhood than I live in.
I talk about the Celtics, not the Raptors.
You know Torch. He started from the bottom, and now he's here.
Here he is.
Hey, so